Hi everyone, and welcome back to Haunted History Chronicles. Before we introduce today's podcast or guest, if you like this podcast, please consider leaving a review. It costs nothing, but it helps share news of the podcast and guests I feature with others interested within the paranormal. It's a simple and easy way to help the podcast continue to grow and be a space for people to chat and come together. If you haven't already found us on the Haunted History Chronicles website, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, you can find links to all social media pages in any of the notes for an episode. Come and join us to get involved and gain access to additional blogs, news, and updates. And now, let's get started introducing today's episode. This week we're going to be heading back to the wilds of Bodmin Moor to revisit the Jamaica Inn, Cornwall's infamous smuggler's inn that inspired Daphne du Maurier to write one of her best-known novels. If you haven't listened to the first podcast episode about the inn, I will share the link in the podcast episode description notes. Make sure to take a listen to add more context. This remote 18th century smuggler's inn has found fame the world over for its ghosts. What is the cause of the footsteps heard throughout the building late at night when there's no one there? What about the mysterious hooded figure seen in multiple areas of the inn? Then there's the highwayman in the tricorn hat, who's seen by terrified guests. We'll be talking to the Jamaica Inn's paranormal investigator, Karin, to get some fascinating updates on the inn's history, as well as discussing many of these spooky goings-on that still happen to this day that can be linked to its past. So get comfortable, because you really are in for a treat. Hello, thank you for joining me tonight.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me back again.
Well, I can't wait to kind of talk about the inn again, to be honest, but also to kind of come back to some of that history, some of the things that we've talked about before, but obviously things that you found out since then or things that you can add to that picture. Because what's fascinating is this ever-growing evolution of not only what you're putting together in terms of the history, but also the paranormal history as well. So, it's great that we're going to have this chance to look at some of that documentation, look at the history, and have a really good deep dive, really.
It's fascinating, especially for me as a paranormal investigator, that every year you uncover a new nugget of information or a new folklore tale, and it's never boring.
But it's quite unique. It's quite rare to have a location that traces and documents the kind of history, the kind of hauntings that the inn does. And, the fact that you do that to the depth that you do, like I said, is so rare. It's so unique. And it's a fabulous opportunity for someone wanting to explore the paranormal, someone who loves their history, someone who loves different aspects of history, to see where the inn fits into all of that. I mean, it's amazing what you're doing and what you've done so far to date.
Yeah, and for 8 years, being able to document and study a world famous location as the Jamaica Inn, especially with the Daphne du Maurier connection, and with Gemma, Rachel, Lisa, and now Craig joining us as the Jamaica Inn Paranormal team. We all bring something to the table, which is so lovely to have that fabulous family feel about it.
And what I think is going to be fantastic about, hopefully, about this podcast is there's so much that the general public doesn't know or that they think they know. And, hopefully this really gives them a much greater depth of understanding about the inn, not just the Daphne du Maurier connection and, the story that comes through from the book, but the actual real history, the real story of the inn, because it's so big, it's so vast, and it changes constantly, not only through who owned the inn, who was looking after it, but how it grew, how it started, different things that affected the inn at different times, through the centuries. There's just so much. It's so vast a history, and it all plays into the, what you see happening today in terms of paranormal activity, but also how the inn has been shaped to what it is today.
Very much so. And, with myself, that is totally obsessed and very nerdy about the place, I never get bored. And I'm back down there again tomorrow. And every time you have a paranormal night or you speak to a member of staff, there's another story. And collecting this vast data of reports going back to the 1950s, but also it's there for the Jamaica Inn because in the next generation, at least they'll have that data for them to use.
Absolutely. So, do you want to kind of start by just taking us back to the very early foundations, the origin story of the inn, and how, John Broad and his family played such an integral part, really, to the inn story?
Very much so. So everyone thinks the Jamaica Inn was built in 1750, and I did in the past. But we now know through some research from a local historian that the previous owner commissioned that actually there was no hamlet, there was no Jamaica Inn to begin with. So round about 1760, a man called John Broad, and he may have been a sea captain, which adds an intriguing twist to the tale. And with a handshake only. So again, no written tenancy, which is unheard of, by a gentleman called James Scarwin from Northamptonshire. He was allowed to hedge in 20 acres of land on Bodmin Moor. Now, this is over 900 feet above sea level. It's drizzly a lot of the time, wet, windy, and he built a small dwelling house. Now, the dwelling house is the Jamaica Inn as you look at it from the outside up to the chimneys only. And I think now the museum was probably a small barn. Now, fabulously, he called this bold venture, and it became the hamlet further along in time of Bolventure. But it wasn't just that, he also became a tenant of a dry clay works, literally 2 miles away from the inn, because Cornwall had such fantastic clay to make its own superb china pottery, porcelain. So this man had money. Where did he get it from? That's the mystery. Now, we know he had two sons, James, the older, and John Jr. And I think very romantically, they married two sisters, Mary and Frances Granville. So this carried on. And also, as well, you have to remember that time period, people were more self sufficient. It also became a farm, and it was a farm well into the early 20th century. So bear that in mind. This carried on for a few years, perfectly normal. And then we had round about 1778, just before, the toll roads were built. And that meant a road went past the Jamaica Inn, where originally it was just a Roman track. So suddenly you had business of coaches, horse riders, and they needed a stopover place. So John decided to extend the Jamaica Inn. So he put two side gables, he added a stable block and a tack room, and also the building opposite that we call the annex. And as we know now, a small cottage with a barn that became the smithy. Now, the smithy is still there, and the big bellows are still in the Jamaica Inn, and they're huge, absolutely massive things. So we get to that. So 1778, it suddenly becomes Jamaica Inn. So now, where did the name come from? There are now three theories. The most common one is the Trelawney family, local landowners, who two of the members were governors of Jamaica. Another new one is that if John Broad was a sea captain, did he go from England to Jamaica to bring back rum in his sailing days? But the most romantic one that I love is the folklore of the landlord having a barrel of fruit that was going off. He decided to boil it, and the locals came to buy what they called the jam from the Jamaica Inn.
Which is lovely, isn't it?
That's lovely.
I totally get why that's your favorite one, because it really is just such a unique story, a unique twist on how the name could possibly have come about. I can't think of any other location with a story like that when it's
Fabulous, isn't it? Absolutely fabulous.
But John Broad, I mean, just thinking about what you just said, what an incredible person to. I mean, you can really see what kind of a grifter he was, so business savvy to look at this opportunity to see here's this kind of footfall coming through now. Let's take this opportunity to make some money. Let's turn what I've got here in this dwelling into something of purpose, a place that can be used for all these people now able to travel through on their route to somewhere else. I mean, just so quick, so sharp. And you have to wonder if that's partly why he came to have the money that he obviously had. But you have to wonder what kind of other deals and things that he'd done along the way to get that kind of money to start off.
Is this the smuggling route? Who knows? And again, I just think it's that hidden bit of history that we would so love to find out, but obviously it's going to be impossible now.
I mean, it's a difficult job. We're talking going back a very long time. It's not an easy thing to start piecing all of this together. And it, like I say, it's incredible that you've been able to go that far back and find out all of these different things and really chart the inn from that very, very humble beginning, and to see how it started to grow very rapidly from just that simple dwelling with that piece of land to how quickly it started expanding, and then things appearing around it, and then obviously you are where you are now.
Exactly. And it's an interesting thing for me to go there, and we think one of the spirits might be abroad. And I would so love to be able to sit down and have a conversation and find out about his life, his dreams, and the history that went on. Late 1700s, we were at war with France. We'd lost the American colonies. There was high taxation, hence the smuggling. And the Cornish were such a proud people, they called themselves the Cornish Free Traders. So, this was a very independent race.
It's really fascinating seeing how established this family was within the community, because they had the lease for almost 100 years. I mean, they obviously didn't all make it that far. I mean, John Broad didn't have residents there for 100 years, but to be part of that community, to have that kind of sense of, this is where I am, this is where I intend to be, this is my kind of roots. I don't know if you have that nowadays, that sense of really trying to bed down where you are and make something in the place that you're in. I mean, it's just a fascinating insight into his character, I think.
It's fabulous. And then, the one that fascinates me most is the oldest son, James Broad. But I'm also fascinated by the Georgian times, how he spoke, the language. I mean, they probably spoke Cornish as well. So we try to speak Cornish sometimes when we're there. And I found a fantastic newspaper article from 1798. So, of course, you've got these wacky potions that solve every ill going. And there was one in the main town of Cornwall was Launceston. That was the old capital. And in 1798, John Broad, yeoman, because us English love our titles and our class system. So John Broad, yeoman of the Jamaica Inn, signed an affidavit in in a room with 3 other well-known gentlemen of Launceston, that Mr. Ching, who was a chemist from Launceston, he devised a worm tablet. And we forget everyone had worms in those days, including children. And John Broad states that he suffered greatly with pains in his stomach and bowels, and after taking one of Mr. Ching's worm lozenges, he excised worms of various lengths from a few inches to 7 feet, and he had not suffered any problems since.
I hope nobody's listening to this whilst eating their dinner. I apologise. Because that's quite a powerful visual.
But it just shows that was acceptable to be in a newspaper during that time.
Yeah, and also what, again, coming back to John Broad, what does it say about him that actually he's got to be so much part of this community that they're actually seeking out his endorsement? He's
Exactly.
part of that crew.
And I even have Mr. Ching, this is amazing chemist. I even have one of his own minted coins with his face on the coin.
I'm kind of glad that none of his potions and his remedies are still around. Can you imagine what effect they might have if you took them nowadays?
Well, it's like there's another one in 1854 from Edward Truscott, who claims that after taking a drink that it cured his asthma, and he couldn't sleep, led down for 5 years, and he was cured. So thank God we have regulations now.
Absolutely. But again, I think it probably comes back to what you were saying as to why do these things end up in the paper? Well, I suppose if there is no regulatory body, and if they're all just basically coming up with their own methods for solving something, of course they're advertising their wares, and they're putting it out there. So, and it's obviously of something that's interesting for the public to need to be able to read it, because there aren't the cures that we have. There isn't the solution. And so, these remedies were something almost like news itself. They were, here's what you can try. This is the latest thing that cures this. It was actually newsworthy because it was relevant.
Yes, very, very much so. So, again, it's a fascinating glimpse into what would have been a brilliant piece in time. And when you look at the Jamaica Inn now, most of the public do not realize there's such an amazing story within those walls.
Absolutely. And as we've kind of already discovered, it starts with obviously someone who was very interesting himself, obviously charismatic, a grifter, this mystery possibly around how he got his money. I mean, that there's a story there as well. It's not just the inn. There are so many layers of things that really can draw you in, that make it such an incredible place, because it's special. You don't come across those kinds of things every day, do you? These kinds of people and these kinds of stories.
Yes, very much so. And I mean, also as well, towards the end of the 1700s, James's younger brother John and his wife were running a nearby inn in Altrincham called the King's Head. So John Broad Senior had let James take over the Jamaica Inn. So he had another son in another tenancy. So that man had done well. He built up an establishment.
And again, it comes back to what you were saying. They just seem to have really embedded themselves in the community, and you can really see the impact, the mark that they've left. It's just there. It's so abundantly clear, isn't it, that they were so important to the community, that they were being sought out, to the inn, how it started, but also how this community started growing. They started growing around these types of locations, and without him doing that in the first place, who knows? Who knows what you would have had there now, if it would be something completely different.
But the sad thing is, we get to 1801 and John Broad Sr. passed away. And unfortunately, by 1803, James, his son, had died. And that's when the first proper agreement was drawn up. And what interests me was these tenancies were classed as 99 years or 2.5 lifetimes. So it shows the life expectancy if they say 2.5 lifetimes.
Yeah, it's very revealing, isn't it? That people just didn't live that long. They expected hands to change and it to be someone
Yeah.
different taking over because,
And also the mortality rate as well. So, when you go then to 1812, John Broad Jr. had died and he'd married again a second wife called Elizabeth. And interestingly, it was Elizabeth who took on the Jamaica Inn. So she was a widow. So I don't know what happened to Mary, James's wife, because they had 6 or 7 children. Whether it was too much, did they fall out with each other? There's all these hidden questions. But interestingly, by 1828, Elizabeth had left the inn. Do you remember I said that John Broad, the father, had 20 acres of land?
yeah.
By 1828, when the new tenancy agreement was drawn up for the next tenant, it had grown to 1,565 acres.
Which is huge. It's massive.
That is massive. Now, where did they get the money? And I don't think it could have been just the pub trade, because I have a really interesting, I love this, a letter from 1880 from a Gordon Booker describes his stay at the Jamaica Inn, and I quote, "Bold venture, alas, the Jamaica Inn, where good entertainment is falsely promised to man and horse inside, I never beheld." He goes on to describe that the bread hadn't been delivered, they were out of cheese, the potato crop had failed, only a mug of decent beer could be procured.
Very poor 1-star rating.
So it was a very rough and ready inn then.
Yeah, it served its purpose.
Yes.
And that was about
So
it.
again, where did this wealth? And people forget that these weren't lowly landlords. They had money. They had a servant or 2 servants. They had servants working on the farm. So yeah, smuggling 101.
Again, it's that grifter thing. You have to wonder. You have to kind of wonder how many pies he had his fingers in and the family had in, because you just don't acquire that kind of wealth. That's a staggering amount in quite a short period of time, actually, in terms of money that they've obviously built up and land and property and so many different other assets along that way. I mean, it's huge.
Very, very much so. So then by the 1828, one of the tenants was a Thomas Dunn. And this man and what he got up to is the next crucial thing in our story. So there is a woman called Mary Downing, and I love her because I think what a woman she must have been. Because in 1834, she sued Thomas Dunn to recognise their bastard son, Thomas Dunn Downing. And I even have a copy of the baptism at the local Altrincham church where Thomas is named as the father. One problem, his wife Annabella gave birth the same year. So I don't think they would have had a happy life in the Jamaica Inn when she found that out.
No, you can imagine glasses flying.
Yes, and it might explain why the following year in 1835, now remember I said there were toll roads, so there would have been toll bridges where you had to pay to go past. And down the hill, there's a toll called Palmer's Bridge. And poor Annabella, whether it's her fault or the gentleman in the toll house, but there was all I can describe as a fight, and he was fined.
Do you know how much he was fined?
No, it didn't say. I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted. But she probably wasn't a happy woman.
No, it doesn't sound like an easy life for her, does it really?
Exactly.
Husband with a
Exactly.
wandering eye and
And she
getting into
carried
trouble.
a poor woman, as they did in those days. Every 1 to 2 years, they had a child, then another child.
Yeah, and she's kind of left dealing with that, and like we said, just has this husband with his philandering eyes and wandering ways, and
Oh, very, very much so.
not a happy marriage.
But again, it's fabulous. So over the course of the next 20 odd years, 20, 30 years, you see local families either own or become tenants of this establishment. Now, Thomas Dunn did advertise, and I will find the exact thing because I can't remember it all. So he did advertise that he had done up in 1843, that he'd done the inn up and it was suitable for carriages, etc., and the public to come and stay in nice clean surroundings. So he was looking to make the place far more respectable.
To improve on that 1-star rating.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it.
But you can kind of understand why, because obviously it was built and kind of put together as a means of really trying to hone in and kind of capitalize on this new trade, this thoroughfare. And so then once they can see it's working and they're kind of really bedded in there, it's then about making it long standing, something that's going to last, really trying to make it, like you said, respectable, something that is more than just somewhere that people come, their horses outside, it gets a bit of water, they get a little bit of food, and then they're on their way. It's really making it something more than that, isn't it?
It is indeed. And this is now we get to the stage of another folklore. So there is a fabulous story. So when you're in the old part of the Jamaica Inn and you walk up the stairs that are there presently, and you look to your left and immediate right, you'll see a square window. And supposedly a candle was lit to warn if the custom men were out, which would make sense, if you're smuggling goods. But recently I found of another story that a landlady would put the candle there for the all clear for the local farmer when her husband, the landlord, was away because they were having an affair.
Oh, bit of hanky panky.
A bit of gossip. So, as you look into the census, which is such a handy place to find out who lived where at what time period, unfortunately, all you see is a name and you don't have that connection. But last year, I was so lucky. I was studying the 1871 census and I thought, why didn't I see this before? And I saw a name called Frances Braddon, 42, retired from Her Majesty's Royal Navy. And I thought, okay, what's that about? And I was so lucky to find out about him. So this is the story of Francis Braddon, a man who didn't seem to marry, who was very proud and very proper. We know he was born in 1829 in Launceston, and 1871 he was a lodger at the Jamaica Inn. So that became, as we go on to the next section, something that seemed to happen quite regularly. He joined probably about late teens, early 20s with Her Majesty's Navy, which then was the biggest navy in the world. So he had an education, but he joined us as assistant paymaster. So what is a paymaster? So he was commissioned. The role was as an accountant's officer for cash to the Accountant General of the Navy. So by 1864, he was now wearing a uniform with an added white strip of distinction cloth between the gold rings on his arms. So a local man made good. It was an important role, and he travelled all over the world in his career. So every time they assigned him, they announced it in the newspapers. So you could see all these wonderful ships that he sailed on. So one of the ships was the Amethyst, and there is an actual stamp commemorating that ship, which is fabulous. It looks like a frigate.
Oh, wow.
He also sailed on many, including the Leopard and the Black Prince. But what was the best thing was in 1858, he was fined for being drunk and disorderly. And he was so angry that he wrote a letter to the Falmouth Gazette to claim his innocence and repair his reputation. And I'll just quote some from it. Sir, I have to request you will insert the following in your widely circulated paper, a paragraph having appeared in the West Briton relative to myself, wherein is stated that on the 11th I was charged with being drunk at midnight in the borough of Penryn and fined 5 shillings in costs. I have to therefore to request you be pleased to find space in the columns of your paper for the few remarks I feel in duty bound to bring before your notice. In the first instance, I would call your attention to the peculiar manner in which the report is inserted in the West Briton, as would make it appear that the constable had made the first charge. Such was not the case, as the first summons was taken out by me against the policeman White for an assault, and it was not until the 27th that I was summoned to answer to the charge of being drunk, a period of 16 days having elapsed from the time the offence was adhered to have been committed. Now, to me, this shows a man of honour, intellect, and proud of his position in the Royal Navy, especially his reputation. So I lose him for a little while, but I find out in 1904 he was lodging in Launceston in a lodging house, and as he walked out one day, he tripped and broke a bone in his hip, though he sadly passed away the following year in 1905. So my next quest is to find his resting place in Launceston and to lay a wreath to commemorate this wonderful lodger of the Jamaica Inn.
Oh, what a nice conclusion that would be, to kind of be able to do that, to have that kind of conclusion to his story, if you will, because like you say, he seems a very proud and special character who really did appreciate what he was doing, value what he was doing, and care about what he was doing enough to be articulate, to challenge something, to challenge the law, to write his name, you know, to put things to right, which, you know, most people would not do. They wouldn't be able to. They would not be able to do something like that. So it says a lot again about his character.
Again, and it's also from a name you have put meat on bones, as I call it. So, you know, now you have this person. So you never know, one day there may even be an old photograph somewhere of him. Imagine obtaining that. And this is the beauty of this hidden world of the Jamaica Inn, finding out about these people that pass through their doors.
Yeah, and it's such an incredible history, because it is going from one person to another, and each has their own part of the story to tell. They're each individuals that, like you said, they're human beings, and they're bringing something to the inn. But it's also a location that's kind of seen so much change because of influences and things taking place around them. And when you were talking about someone being in a position where they're having to defend their honor because of being found drunk, possibly, see how some played very much heavily into the inn's history because of the temperance movement. And it's something that I think people are aware of, but maybe don't really understand the magnitude of that area of history, because it wasn't just churches coming together, religious groups coming together, to form this movement to try and really prevent people from drinking, to scale back all these problems that they saw coming from working class people drinking too much and bawdy behavior, children drinking. It wasn't just about that. It was about Parliament stepping in. It was about pamphlets being written. It was about all these different groups of people with very serious concerns at this particular moment of time, really openly discussing the demon of drink and the impact that it had on people's behavior. And morality was the thing really at the heart of it all. These concerns and questions about what was happening. And there's one image that I always think of that really kind of highlights just how much this was in kind of the popular discussion and in people's minds. And that was the piece of artwork that really looked at the problems around gin. And so you have this piece called Gin Lane, created by William Hogarth. And if anybody looks it up, you can see exactly what it was that they were saying about drink and the influence that drink had, and why it should be something that should be curbed, that it should be something that people should abstain from. Because when you look at this image, you've got drunken mothers literally asleep, passed out with their bare breasts hanging out, and their babies are literally tumbling out of their arms to the floor. You've got other mothers who are pouring drink into the mouths of their babies. You've got emaciated soldiers with their cups falling out of their hands because they're so drunk. You've got images of crumbling buildings that are falling down because nobody's really doing any work and being productive. You've got a riot and a brawl happening in one corner of the picture. You've got someone hanging from a noose, and then you've got bodies being put into coffins, suggesting that crime is up. And again, this was something that really did get discussed everywhere. This was the same time when Parliament were discussing the rise in crime and suggesting it was down to drink. And so you had changes in law to really crack down on punishment because of this fear that crime was on the rise because of too much drinking involved amongst the working classes. You had questions around women and their place in these establishments and whether they were being led astray or if they had loose morals. I mean, it was so much embedded in what was happening at that time. It's fascinating.
It's to me, the temperance movement is absolutely huge, and it had such an effect around the country, and it had an effect on the Jamaica Inn.
Yeah, for it to kind of make its way down to Cornwall, and for the inn itself to become a temperance inn. This was somewhere where alcohol would not be consumed, it would not be sold.
Exactly. And many might not realize that by 1880 it had become a temperance house, and they didn't get their license back to 1950 after 4 attempts.
Yeah, post the Second World War. That's a sizable amount of time where actually you couldn't consume alcohol. You were teetotal. You could not get it in that spot.
And again, the local farmers, they were the biggest objectors every time the Jamaica Inn tried to gain its license back. And this takes us on then to beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating to kind of see how all of those things really have just help steer it along the way until we're kind of closer to where we are today, to see some of the changes and influence that have been had on the inn itself. It's fascinating.
Very much so. So, you know, this little inn in this barren wilderness of Bodmin Moor, would have remained unknown if it wasn't for a visit in 1930 by a young lady who we all know, Daphne du Maurier. Now, what happened on 1930 and 1931 changed the inn's fortune. So most people will have heard of the story. She was staying there in 1930 with her friend, presumably in room 4, though we're not 100% sure. And she went to visit an old lady, and they had horses from the Jamaica Inn. Because again, people don't realise they also did auctions of cattle. It was a working farm, and horses were there all the way through because of the smithy. So on the way back, the rain came in, they got lost, they sheltered in a derelict building, and then her friend said, let the horses lead the way. And I love the account. And as she's coming up the hill towards the Jamaica Inn, the landlord stood outside with a lantern in the darkness, waiting for them. And they spent a few days there recovering, but it was the following year in November 1931 she came to stay. And this is a story that most people don't know. The local vicar from Altrincham, who I only found out last year was his name, was a Charles Triplett. He came to have afternoon tea with her, no alcohol, and he regaled her with stories of wreckers and smugglers around the Cornish coast. And then, a few years later, what happened? Jamaica Inn book. It then became a film in 1939 with Charles Laughton, one of our famous English actors, and the new Maureen O'Hara, who only recently died a couple of years ago. And that put the Jamaica Inn on the map. Whereas years after, people would visit the Jamaica Inn because of that connection, including royalty, film stars, celebrities. But I'll tell you a bit more of that in a minute.
I love that. I love the kind of the little dropping of things. But it's fascinating to know that the significance that moment really does have in making this location so well known, the power that one book had to really put it in our psyche, that so much so that we know the name all over the world.
Exactly. And I have a fabulous quote from Daphne from 1936. Jamaica Inn stands today, hospitable and kindly, a temperance house on the 20-mile road between Bodmin and Launceston. In the following story of adventure, I have pictured it as it might have been over 120 years ago, and although existing place names figure in the pages, the characters and events described are entirely imaginary.
Oh, just so rich, isn't it? I mean, it just brings the whole place alive when you hear something like that. I mean, it's just fascinating. It's just so incredible. And
if you've never read the book, please read the book, because it's so different to the film and the TV app, that happened after. The book is fantastic.
it is, but it's something that I think for those who've only read the book, that's what they also think the inn is. And I think that's something we'll be able to talk about a little bit later. But it's the beginnings, isn't it? It kind of sets the scene. It gives you that sense of place, the sense of atmosphere, and it touches on some of these stories that had really influenced her, the tales, from within the local area and the local community. And you can see that coming through in the book, which is incredible, to see it on the page and to see it come to life.
Very, very much so. And of course, when the film came out in 1939, the clouds of war were coming over, and unfortunately, World War II started, and it changed everything for so many people.
And
So,
changed the inn again. Again, this is something that had such a significant impact on the inn. And we can focus on the history from centuries ago, but actually that more recent history is just as revealing in terms of what the inn has to say also. So it'll be fascinating to kind of hear some of the things that you found out about that part of history and the impact on the inn.
So we know that the landlord or manager, because it wasn't owned by him, was a Claude Finnemore. And we know that the Jamaica Inn became the local post office. So the farmers would go there to pay their rent. Now, what interests me is local aura history. And if you have the chance, anyone who's looking into the past, please interview people, the older generation, before they go, because once they've passed on, that history is lost forever. And it's happened to me a few years ago. There was a lovely old local at the Jamaica Inn. One day I was walking past and he said, "You don't know what went on here during the Second World War, all the secret meetings." And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" And I thought, "Oh, I'll come back." And I could kick myself because I didn't. And the man passed away, and we've lost some valuable information. So, what intrigues me is when the Americans joined the Second World War, many people not realize just before D-Day, there were 4 million US troops in the UK. Absolutely huge population. There were 8,000 camped around Bodmin and Bodmin Moor alone. And, I read a wonderful account of a gentleman who described his voyage on the Queen Mary coming over because it was used as a troop ship, came to Bristol and took a train down to their camp in Bodmin. Now, what most don't realise again is in Cornwall, there were 4 prisoner of war camps for Italians and Germans alone, just in Cornwall. And I was reading through, and then on the 22nd of June 1944, Claude Finnemore, the landlord, claimed that General Patton stayed for 3 nights at the Jamaica Inn. And he brought his own eggs so he could have eggs and ham for breakfast. And I thought, why would a general stay at the Jamaica Inn? Well, of course, it's isolated, it's out the way. So I looked at his diary, and Patton's diaries are available online to read. But his writing is atrocious, it's like a doctor's. But there's one comment on the 23rd of June 1944 where he describes if it was the inn, because it was called at the time the Jamaica Inn Hotel, that he admired a woman's legs sat at the bar. And I quote, "She had the longest legs I had ever seen."
Oh,
And
dear.
on the 25th of June 1944, he then drove to Exeter to pick up Eisenhower, and I have another account that on a hill overlooking the Jamaica Inn, Patton was famous for doing his speeches, etc., and Eisenhower was there. But we also have an account of George VI, who came to review the practice of the D-Day's landing and having lunch in a field next to the Jamaica Inn. So is it true that secret meetings went on? Because a local historian called Jim Edward claims that our own General Montgomery visited Patton at the Jamaica Inn. Imagine that, if that was true, that meeting.
I mean, it makes complete sense, doesn't it? Because what you've got, again, like you said earlier, is a location that's isolated. It's out of the way. It's a perfect place for that kind of meeting to take place. It's not.
Exactly. And there's an airport nearby called Davistow, around about 7 miles as the crow flies. And they had the big US bombers going off from there as well. But obviously, Cornwall being Cornwall, you had a lot of fog and mist, and you had plane crashes. A German bomber actually crashed in to Brown Willie, which is the hill next to the Jamaica Inn, killing everyone.
And you weren't kidding when you said it's a location that's seen royalty, people of note, because I mean, just think about all those different people that you've just mentioned. I mean, just wow.
Very, very much so.
So you could basically be sitting in a spot where a king has been close by to, and where a secret war meeting has been taking place whilst you're having your pint and your sandwich. I mean, it's just staggering.
Exactly. And, you know, and I mean, I'll go back to the stories from the 1950s, but we'll just go on. So after the war, it was sold again. They got their license back and it went through various owners. But one of the other famous owners was Alistair MacLean, the famous author, who bought it in 1964, and he paid £27,500. That's a lot of money.
You dread to think what that would be now.
Very much so. So then it goes through other owners. I mean, the Watts were there for a long time. And then 8 years ago, a businessman called, who obviously I know, Alan Jackson, he had literally a 15-minute look and bought it on the spot for £2 million. And he recently sold it in 2022 for over 8 million to the wonderful coaching group run by the lovely Kevin Charity, who you've interviewed yourself.
Yeah, he really cares about his ends, and you can tell. And it's great that the Jamaica Inn is now part of that group, because I mean, it's such an iconic location, and to know that someone's going to continue to care for it and to help do the things to it that should happen to keep a building the way that it should be kept for future generations, really.
Exactly. And as we speak at the moment, the two museums, the Smuggling Museum, the Daphne du Maurier Museum, are being renovated, hopefully finished by the 27th of February 2023. And a lot of work has gone into it by a wonderful archivist called Jane, who is looking at the real smuggling, the real stories of the smugglers of Cornwall, as the man called the King of Prussia. And I'm not going to give any more away, because what I've seen so far is absolutely fabulous. But it shows the care that Kevin Charity has for his inns, and having the real history shine through from these wonderful hotels that he looks after.
We are about to celebrate hitting our 100th episode of Haunted History Chronicles on the last Friday of April 2023. To say thank you, for the months of May, June, and July, there are going to be daily paranormal podcasts available to enjoy on all tiers over on Patreon, as well as the usual additional items available over there. Signing up now will gain you access to these, as well as all previous archived content. For as little as £1, you could be getting hundreds of podcasts to enjoy, and more. And know that you're contributing and helping the podcast to put out another 100 episodes. You can find the link in the episode description notes, as well as on the Haunted History Chronicles website, along with other simple and great ways to support the podcast directly. It's all truly very much appreciated. And now, let's head back to the podcast. Kind of touched upon there smuggling and the significance, and the things that are taking place to really kind of highlight some of that as part of this renovation. But like some of the things that we've spoken about, smuggling really, again, does play such a significant part in the inn's history and the local area's history. You know, it was big business. I mean, smuggling was something that brought in huge amounts of different things. I mean, the estimates for what it brought into the country from abroad, you know, half of the UK's brandy, a quarter of the UK's tea. I mean, that's massive. I mean, I wish we could kind of, you know.
But, you know, the English have always done this as well. I
Yeah.
mean, when I had a pub 30 years ago, I used to have things come through my door. And when we used to go on holidays years ago, we always used to have extra tobacco or an extra drink in our luggage coming back.
But when you see supermarkets at the moment struggling to get things in the shops and, you know, announcements all the times of problems with veg and them having to limit how much you can have of this or that. I mean, back then you had this booming business, you know, this underground and yet known business of bringing things in illicitly onto the Cornish coast.
Yeah, so the
Huge.
farmers rented out their mules to go down to the beach to bring up the goods, and everywhere it stopped. And you have to remember, for the local Cornish people, this was an essential way of life as well. And, you know, it was a way to make a little bit of money. Even the custom men were paid off, the judges were paid off, they were all involved.
I mean, really quite significant people as well. I mean, you had, wasn't there someone in the Admiralty who was part of it all? I mean, just really key people along the whole kind of chain, all walks of life, part of the community involved. It wasn't the rough and ready people that you might expect. It was literally people on every single socio-economic level involved in this,
Of
which is
course,
staggering.
of course, you know, you would, you know, just us in the 70s and 80s coming back with extra cigarettes that, you know, people would sell on 100 of them to their friends and things like that. You know, there's always been that enterprise. But as soon as the Prime Minister Peel changed you know, the law, it wasn't economic to do that excessive smuggling of the brandy because they could buy it for the same price in the shops.
Yeah, and that kind of really hits as to why it was needed in the first place, you know, that it was such big business because taxation, like you briefly mentioned, was so high. And until that was changed, you know, the demand for it, the need for it really was there because here was a way of bringing it in to be able to sell and it'd be far cheaper, you know, in comparison.
Very much so, yeah.
So, what were some of the odd, maybe more unusual things that they smuggled in? Is there anything really kind of like you
Well,
might
you
might
know,
not expect?
so one thing in the old museum, you would see watches put in Bibles where the pages were cut out, budgerigars in corsets. There's a huge tortoise that was used for over 20 odd years being smuggled in and out with goods inside it.
Oh
And
my,
the person got away with it all that time.
oh my God, what a unique way of carrying cargo.
Exactly. You know, huge tortoise.
But also
Um,
the budgies inside a corset, like, hello. I mean, you can't.
heels, you know, hollow heels.
Yeah.
And you watch shows nowadays, you know, where they smuggle things in, but obviously, you know, with X-ray things like that, you can't get away with it like they did in the old days.
No, they didn't have people at customs there ready to to stop things and
I'm
to
sure they didn't pat down a pregnant woman
no,
in those days, whether she was pregnant or not.
no dogs to sniff your goods and you know
Yeah,
machines to put your packages through. But the organization for this, I mean, we're laughing. The organization of this is staggering. You know, this was a very well-oiled machine, if you like, to make this happen, for carried out, and like we said, to involve people at every level of the community, so that it kind of was this thriving, booming business.
Exactly. And, the Jamaica Inn is built on solid granite. I mean, there was a water tank to pump the water up from lower down the hill, and there were a couple of wells. But where did they hide it to? There must have been strategic stopping off places as they travelled up from Cornwall, Devon, on to London and other parts of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I
But
mean,
it also shows how the smugglers invented ghost stories as well to keep people away. There's a famous case in the East Coast of a ghost drummer, but that was made up by the smugglers. And it leads me on to a lovely another folklore story of a man on his deathbed where the local vicar came to give the rites, etc. And the man confessed that many years ago he met the vicar on the coastal path, and as it came to a fork, the vicar wanted to go via the down through the coast, along the beach and back up, and the man said no, go that way. And he said to him, I'm so glad you chose that way because we were having a delivery. And if you had gone to the beach, I would have had to slit your throat. So, whether it's true or not, who knows? But it's such a wonderful story of an old smuggler asking forgiveness.
but it also highlights, as well as the kind of the need for the ghost stories, it kind of highlights this darker element to it, the risk of exposure, of being found out, of having to keep it so
Oh,
secret and
yes.
hush up. And it's important not to overlook that this was very clandestine. It had to be. And just the nature of how it got from the ships themselves, just thinking up to the inn, the fact that you've got that lovely window that was used to light when it was all clear and when it was safe for people to
Mm.
do that. This was secretive. It had to be. And you can see that in every part of what happened and how they did it, because otherwise the risk was being caught.
I mean, during the height of the smuggling, as we know when we've spoken to Richard Felix before, you could be hung for over 200 offences. And when the 1752 Murder Act came in, they denied you a Christian burial. So if you were hung for murder, your body would be given over and dissected,
Yeah.
and your skin could be used to bind a book, as it happened to a poor lad in Bristol called John Horwood, who was only 18. So, the risk was massive.
Yeah. And like you said, it then feeds these stories of ghosts to keep people away, to make them frightened, to kind of poke their noses into something. And you have these stories of dangers of possibly meeting your end on, if you go one way, having your throat slit. These
Yes.
stories become part of the community, that kind of day-to-day culture, and in their minds, to stop them looking, to stop asking those difficult questions, and to turn that blind eye when it's needed. So this trade can continue, and the people involved don't end up on the end of a noose.
Very much so. And, so it leads us on now to the oddities of the Jamaica Inn.
It has oddities, no.
So before you had the Smugglers Museum, there was a museum there called Potter's Museum of Curiosity, and that was put in there in 1980, and it was founded by a Victorian taxidermist called Walter Potter in 1861 in Bramber in West Sussex. So what he would do, which was really bizarre, he would stuff kittens and birds and then put it like an afternoon tea and things like that. So it was very bizarre. And if you look online, you can see the pictures. And I remember chatting to some people, and people of my age remarking that it traumatized them to see all this, all these stuffed animals in these weird attractions there. Interestingly, when it was sold, in 2003, the collection was made £500,000. And some of the famous celebrities that bought it was comedian Harry Hill, photographer David Bailey, and artist Peter Blake. And, I must admit, I'm glad it's not there now, because I don't think even I would like it somehow.
You got to wonder where they put them in their house. Like, is it in
Yes,
their
yeah,
toilet, downstairs toilet? Is it, hidden
yeah.
away in
To
some room?
see a cat with a hat on and things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, very, very bizarre. But there are some other amazing things as well. The first ever tarmac road in Britain was outside the Jamaica Inn. And those that have been to the inn, to the restaurant, which is a modern 1980s extension, may have noticed these wonderful thick oak beams. Now, they came from Devonport Dockyard in Plymouth, and Devonport Dockyard is one of our famous naval bases. Goes back to the 1700s, as far as I'm aware. So you have these modern extensions with old timbers, so it still gives you that feel of history. And again, another seafaring connection. And things like the cobbles, they came up from Plymouth in the 1950s. It would have been just dirt with gravel there before. But one of the things I love, and I've told you the story many times, is Percy the parrot who faked his death. So I'm going to laugh just thinking of it.
Yeah, I've already got a smile on my face.
So there was a parrot there for about 60 years. It was female, but they called it Percy. And it was known for its atrocious language to people. Well, come by the late 1990s, it was pulling out its feathers, it was looked quite bedraggled. And unfortunately, it had died, and there was a lovely burial plot in the back garden of the Jamaica Inn with a plaque, which was fabulous. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. When Alan Jackson extended the restaurant, they dug up Percy's remains, opened the box. No Percy, no bones, no feathers. So I thought, let's try and find what happened to him. So I put a plea in the local paper, on social media, nothing. A few months later, I tried again. And I spoke to a local animal sanctuary who said they went to have a look at him, I think in the late 1990s. And they didn't want to give him to the sanctuary. But then I was contacted by a woman who admitted that he faked his death and went to a family where he lived for another few years. So Percy the parrot, was he a spy? Who knows?
Who does know? Yeah. Well,
It's brilliant.
Percy
And
needs his own autobiography, or someone else to write his biography for him, because who has a fake death, and all of those kinds of things weaved into their stories. Only Percy. Only Percy.
but it also as well, I spoke to a fantastic lady, and I have some of her family photographs of the Jamaica Inn, because in the 50s, her father was the manager there, Mr. Grouse, and he met her mother because his first wife had unfortunately died, who was a barmaid, and they got together, and unfortunately her mum got pregnant, so he had to marry her as they did in those days, and she was born there in 1955. But the story she tells me, the pet pig used to walk around the bar. A pet pig. Her bedroom was haunted room 5, and when she was about 2 or 3, to get her to sleep, they had to put the pet Alsatian in the room with her. And her mother used to say that during the day, the Jamaica Inn was lovely, but as night came, it changed, and she hated being alone in the place.
Mm.
And she would describe how the guests would come down in the morning and say, who's been into my room, because my clothes were on the floor and I've woken up and they've been folded neatly at the end of the bed. What happened to that ghost? Because it definitely isn't there anymore.
We all need that ghost. We all need someone
Exactly.
like that.
And then when she was about 3, the Danish royal family came to visit because, again, you had Diana Dors, you had all these people, and also students of RADA used to work there in the summer. And I wonder if there were any famous celebrities who could tell tales of the Jamaica Inn. Who knows? So this 3-year-old had a doll, and one of the Danish princesses grabbed her doll, and she said that she just walked up to her and shoved her hard on her backside, much to the horror of her father. But lucky enough, the parents, the prince and princess of the Danish royal family, thought it was hilarious. You know, a commoner shoving one of their princesses on their backside.
Yeah.
But her father, I've got a photo. Her father still kept horses in the stable block.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, it's that oral history, and I'm so glad that I had the chance to talk to her, and also a lovely lady who at 17 lived there for 10 years in 1959 and worked behind the bar. And she told us about the layout, how different it was, how the stairs weren't as they are now. They were in the, you know, the main bar, as we call it, which was the lounge. And then a few weeks ago, Rob, our wonderful manager, down at the inn, he deals with all the maintenance, etc. He gave me plans from 1970 which showed the layout of the original Jamaica Inn bedrooms, where they were, and the proposed plans, which they did do by 1972. So the stable block in the museum, they didn't have any floors. You used to see right up to the rafters, where they put extra bedrooms, where they changed things around because they didn't have, as we have now, en suite, where the original staircase was, the additional fireplace that's been lost to history and time. So now you have this fabulous insight to the layout of this wonderful Jamaica Inn. And you think, well, hang on, that door's there now. That's like a 3-foot wall. That wasn't there before 1972. So the tale of this man in the Cape, he couldn't have gone through a brick wall, so he must have gone this way. So again, is gathering that data. It's so, so important.
I was just going to say, this is why you're really doing what you're doing, because by learning these things, by discovering these nuggets of history and these documents and these people and their part that they've played, you can start to piece it to what you're seeing. And this is where oral history is so important, because some of these things are known at local level. And if you're not finding out what the community knows, if you're not kind of gathering that data from guests and people who come through the doors and all of the different groups that come through, you know, all of that body of information really is significant in trying to build up the picture of what happens at the inn.
Exactly. And the interesting thing for me as an investigator is why some ghosts seem to disappear and others take their place. So the ghost or spirit from the 1950s who tidied everything up, where have they gone? And why, in the last 6 years now, do we have a US airman who's been seen 3 times at the Jamaica Inn, once by a 16-year-old girl, as solid as anything, walked past her, but made no sound on the flagstone floor?
Yeah.
So it leads me on now to the hauntings.
Of course, we've got to talk about the hauntings.
Oh God, we've got to talk about the hauntings.
The history, the people, all of these things is so fascinating. But again, you have a location that really does have such broad evidence of different types of phenomena. And, you know, we're talking reports going back decades of reported activity at the inn, which is so
Exactly.
fascinating, again, to kind of build up that body of evidence and accounts, what people have observed, so that you can start to piece together connections or possible patterns, or see how some things have faded away and other things like the airmen, like you were mentioning, how those things come to the fore. I mean, it's fascinating the level of information that you have, really, because of the work that you're putting in to kind of bring all of that together.
Exactly. And for us, we feel we have such a moral responsibility. So when we do our public paranormal nights, we have something called smugglers boards. So any experiences, no matter how silly someone feels, we ask during the break, they write it down, where it was, what happened, because all that data is collected and you see patterns emerge. But we also don't give out everything that haunts the inn, because we want to see if we can get genuine reports and not things that may have been influenced by others. So one of the most interesting things is the hooded figure. It's not a monk, because I will always want to make that quite clear. So 4 years ago in room 4, a medium picked up in the alcove there of a hooded figure of a man. And we thought, okay, didn't take that much notice, but I made a note of it. Then another medium said it the following year. We kept it completely to ourselves. Then Ben, the night manager at the time, was in the cellar behind the main bar. He was bottling up, so he was led on his knees. And a bottle came out in front of him and landed perfectly in front of him. And as he looked to the left, he said what he described was Gandalf, a man with a hood, with a long white beard, and I think like a satchel going across. Now, that really shocked him. So we wrote it down. We kept it, relatively quiet. But then in the last 8 months, it's ramped up. So we had a report of one of the young servers in the lower restaurant, again, a modern extension, the same description. She came out from the kitchen. He was just stood solid as anything by the fireplace. And she thought someone was dressed up, went back, came back out. He was still there. She went to get someone to witness it. He had gone. Then in room 34, which is one of the modern extensions from 4 or 5 years ago, a lady woke up to see a man with a hood and a white beard leaning over, looking intently at her husband's face, which made her jump a little bit.
Yeah.
But what most people don't realise is Cornwall was famous for the Pilgrim Trail from Ireland. They would go by boat from Cornwall to Spain on to Jerusalem. And about 5 miles down from the Jamaica Inn is a village called Temple, and it was founded by the Knights Templar. What were they famous for? For pilgrims having somewhere safe to stay. So the track outside the Jamaica Inn was originally a Roman track. Is that a pilgrim? I don't know. I haven't seen him, but we're keeping all the reports anymore that come in. So that's an interesting one. But we do know the first ever recorded report was in 1911 of a man sat outside on the wall of the Jamaica Inn, dressed in rather old-fashioned clothing, and when locals tried to speak to him, he just disappeared. So I used to think, well, we've had no other reports, that must be a one-off, till I spoke to a lady who in 1977 of a little girl was sat in the back of her parents' car, parked outside the Jamaica Inn on the road, and she said, Mummy, Daddy, who's that strange man on the wall that everyone's ignoring him? He looks weird. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does, because, it's one of those that when you hear it and then you know of that earlier account, the similarities are there, really, aren't they? But to to not have it happen as often makes, when something like that does happen, almost more credible, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? It
Exactly.
makes it stand out. This is something that someone's not speaking about. It's not being put out there all of the time, but yet it's cropping up every so often. And again, you have to ask, well, why is it something that happens then, and then there's this large gap before maybe something else is known? Why is it that some things come through more frequently? Why is that becoming more present at the moment? It just raises so many questions within the paranormal, I think, as to how and why that happens.
Yeah. So we also have to be careful that we don't I'm not say fake, but to put something out there that is not factually correct. It's like Hannah in room 5 didn't exist 14 years ago. It's become its own folklore. What we do know is a little girl that I've seen, first ever apparition, if you want to call it, in a Victorian dress, so a dark grey dress with a white oversmock, beautiful blonde curly hair. I have had tons of reports of the same description. And the most common name, and we know Elizabeths that were born there, is Elizabeth. Is that her name? I can't say hand on heart. But do you remember we talked about Thomas Dunn and Mary Downing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in room 3, for many years, there's been reports of a sobbing woman, a crying baby, but also in room 7, a crying baby, because the layout was different as well. Now, many mediums people picked up, and we wonder, is this Mary Downing? Did she actually work there? Was it a love affair? Wasn't it? We don't know. But again, we say it could be, but we cannot prove it. And is the little boy seen Tommy or Thomas? Because that's been picked up lots of times. You seem to get responses by using those names. But again, we're so careful not to put things as fact that we cannot prove. So we know in the 1950s of a man in a green cape walking through the Jamaica Inn when it was closed, much to the amazement of the staff who've seen him walk and go past her. And we know in the 1980s, when Peter Underwood, one of the famous investigators, the 90s, the Ghost Club came, and then obviously Most Haunted in 2004. So you then have a plethora of investigators, the public, but also there is a huge visitors book, and I've been going through the old one from 2010 and cataloguing all the reports from guests. It's surprising how some things come up again and again, like a television turning itself on at 3 in the morning in room 8. Now those televisions have been updated. And it's not isolated. And in room 9, and that happened January 22 as well. So we know a Victorian woman that's been seen in the shop in room 27 and now in the new room 23. But does that mean that ghost spirits see the Jamaica Inn in real time? Because there's one figure, we don't know if it's Jack or James or whoever. And in 2018, the main bar, a really lovely investigator I was with, and I'm gutted I didn't see it, was sat in the main bar. And there's a table with a bench next to the fire, and we call it Jack's seat. And she looked to her right, and sat in the chair was a man with black hair, curly, black beard, breeches, trousers, white frilly shirt. But she said he was sat in a modern chair, he had his elbow on the table, and he had the hand against his side of his cheek. And she said it was the expression, half amusement, half, what on earth are you doing? Now, that description has been described to me in 2016 outside room 5, and in 2018 by a medium with Haunted Britain Investigates. So it shows the importance of collecting this data.
Absolutely.
And then there was a lady who was moving down to Cornwall in 2018 again. So it was a December midweek night. And it was her and another couple. It was 9:15. She wasn't drinking alcohol. She was just on orange juice. And she saw this girl about 15 come towards her. And she thought, oh my God, doesn't she look lovely dressed up? She had a mop cap, a Victorian mauve coloured dress, and a dirty apron. She carried a tray. So this lady picked her empty glass up, handed it to her. She handed the glass. The young girl just disappeared in front of her. And she's still holding out the glass. And she looks to her husband, who was looking a different way, and said, I think I've just seen a ghost. So again, collecting all these stories, the staff, we have a sort of we call it Discord, where any paranormal reports, they put it on there so I can collect, and keep an account of it. The shop, the young girls used to get their ponytail pulled and books used to fly off the shelves. Seems to have stopped now. The corridor outside the shop that used to be the walkway to Boventure Church that was built in 1847. The ladies' toilets, the little boys been seen by children. The gents' toilets, a man was walking towards it, heard an almighty row going on. So with trepidation, he opened up the door. No one in there. You have so many reports. Everyone thinks room 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the haunted ones. Well, sorry to disappoint you, but in the old block, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 all have paranormal reports.
That importance of really looking at all the evidence that comes in a variety of different forms, whether it's someone who's made a comment in a guest book, whether it's someone from the community who just happens to recount one day while sitting at the bar a story that they remember from when they were little. All of these things really do start coming together and building up a much bigger picture, that if you were just doing it in isolation, just you and your team, and only bringing together that information, compare that small amount with the plethora that you get from other teams, other investigators, guest books, visitors, staff, all of these different people, and suddenly your body of work that you're doing is going to sit alongside, well, these reports, these documents from guest books, and you can start building something much bigger. And that then prompts questions. It helps you to make connections, see patterns, all of these things that we've spoken about, that without that, you wouldn't be able to do that in quite the same way. You wouldn't have enough. You wouldn't have the big picture, if that makes sense. And I think that's what's so important about what you're doing, because you're really thinking big picture, as opposed to what am I doing, what's my team doing. It's what's going on all around us all the time that we can also tap into.
For us, it's a data collection, it's a study, and it's for anyone to have. Now, you don't know about our modern ghost.
No, I don't.
So last year, a lady she's come about 11, 12 times on our public nights, a lovely lady. She was sat in the main museum and she thought a man with a short hair, skinhead type of thing, jumper and jeans had walked past. Then she realised that A, he would have had to walk into the cabinet, and B, I was at the other end with the guests, so no one alive had walked down. So she described that to me. A few months later, we had another report. What they didn't know was in 1980, in the upper restaurant, a member of staff saw a man in modern dress with a orange jumper, dark trousers, standing by the door. And she thought, well, hang on, we've locked up. went down to say, "Excuse me, can I help you?" No one there. So if I didn't know about the old report, I didn't know that there might be a correlation, and that's the importance. So we're just hanging on now to see if we have any more.
Yeah, because you're looking, do you get more of the same type of thing? Or is it just that one encounter? Can you start making those connections? And again, that's where collating and gathering and really thinking of it as a paranormal study is
Mm.
different. You're not just doing it as a one-off. You're really going into in-depth dives in every aspect. And you know just think where you'll be this time next year. What other things you will have uncovered, what other things you may have found in terms of the history, but also reports, experiences. It's constantly growing and shifting, and that's the exciting part, because when you gather more and more
Exactly.
information, you're
You
you're
know,
piecing things together.
I've been in room 5 and had the footsteps around the bed, myself and my friend Tracy, many, many years ago, which was quite amusing because she's a total skeptic and she was nudging me. She said, "You are not going to sleep because the footsteps are coming round to my side. You couldn't see anyone." But I've slept in that room lots of times and had nothing. I think it's just the right time, the right place. And is the tricorn man who walks through the wardrobe of room 5, is it the same shadow figure that's seen standing outside the bathroom staring at the occupants in bed in room 6, and the same one that's been seen twice outside room 5? Who knows?
But again, you wouldn't be able to ask those types of questions if you didn't have the information that you have to be
Mm.
able to actually formulate a question. It's that trying to understand what you have and trying to make sense of what you're having, and then continuing to look and continuing to ask and continuing to try and set things up, investigations, activities, different experiences, to try and answer some of the questions that you've got yourself.
It's the unusual things. 'Cause, I mean, just a few weeks ago, myself and Craig, we were upstairs in the haunted rooms, and we were just picking up kit because we were about to do the last vigil with everyone down in the main bar. So the occupants of the famous haunted rooms were down there already, and we're walking down the corridor, and right between us, a voice just said, "Oi!" And we both stopped, and I said, "Did you?" And he said, "Yeah, what did you hear?" And I said, "I heard oi." He said, "So did I." But there was no one there. There was no one on that particular floor.
Someone wanted your attention.
Yeah, those are the intriguing things that they seem to do. They'll either ignore you or they will try and do things. And, with the renovations of the museum, you think, "Oh my God, it's going to be so active." Nothing since it's been, or, turned upside down. So are they waiting till we finish and then are going to say, "Surprise"?
Or are they really busy just looking and watching and observing what's happening out of curiosity? You just don't know, do you? It's so interesting.
Exactly. And I would love to be able to see ghosts and spirits, but, I'm quite skeptical as an investigator. But that place still intrigues me 8 years on, and I think it will always intrigue me to the end of my days. And if there's such a thing as an afterlife, I know I'm going to go there and haunt it.
You're going to become one of the resident spirits, are you?
Oh, yes. I'm going to chase all the others and say, "Right, I need a conversation with you." And they'll take out a ghostly restraining order out on me.
You'll just get up to mischief.
Oh, definitely,
That's what you would
definitely.
do. Get up to mischief.
But, there are hundreds and hundreds of reports. You could talk for hours about it. But what I say to people is come and experience it for yourself. If you're lucky, you might walk away with scratching your head and thinking, "Did I just experience something paranormal?" Or just enjoy the ambience of the history because it breathes it and it sucks you in and you want to come back time and time again.
And, it's such a unique place. I mean, just thinking about where it is and where it sits. I mean, when you're talking about ambience, you really can't do much better, can you? And I think it's all of that, but it's that big picture in terms of ambience. It's what you're getting that you just can't get in many other places, if anywhere, really.
When you're at the Jamaica Inn and everyone's gone to bed and you're on your own and you've got the wind howling outside and the rain beating on the window panes and you're down at the lower restaurant and you can just feel it come alive.
Yeah.
And interestingly, one of the new night porters, he was about 4 weeks ago, he was working there. He said about 1 in the morning, the atmosphere changed. He said he just felt he was being watched. And he could hear clinking as he went up to the bar. There were 7 or 8 glass pint tankards on a hook. And just those were shaking and hitting each other. The others were silent. And I said, "Oh, what did you do?" He said, "I just thought I'll go and clean somewhere else."
Oh, what does that say that about the inn that you must I mean to just say, oh, I'll just go somewhere else.
But the staff are so used to it.
Yeah.
Years ago, housekeeping, when we used to do our Friday nights, and there was a lovely lady, she unfortunately passed to cancer. And as soon as she saw us, she used to get really fed up. She said, "Oh no, they're going to start." Because she said, room 3, the children, they would clean all the room, the mirrors, then they would go back to check and they would find little handprints all over the mirrors deliberately. And she used to say, "It's your fault because you wound them up." And she was really as if like it was a live child that was doing it deliberately. She used to get so angry with us for causing her extra work.
But I think again it speaks to the location that there is something very much real about what it is that you experience there. So much so that it is part of everyday kind of life for the staff, but also the building itself. It's as much part of the building as everything else that we've spoken about. And
Yeah,
it's
and
what draws people in.
even the Victorian lady that was seen in room 23, people forget there were barns there. She might have been going about doing her daily task,
Yeah.
even though she was stood in the doorway at 2 in the morning. And Marie, who became friends after, looked up bleary-eyed and thought, "What's housekeeping doing in here this time of the morning?" Saw the lady walk into the bathroom and she never came out again. It's lovely.
It is. It's fascinating. It's fabulous. I honestly, I think, like I said, it's a place that you're always finding out new things. So it never gets old. It never gets tired. There's always something that you're uncovering or something that you're trying and piecing together. And it's fantastic to kind of see that passion for the location itself, but also what you're trying to do within the paranormal as well. I mean, it's incredible. So I
Yeah,
take
I don't have a fantastic education. I was born and brought up on a rough council estate. I have a love of history, yes, but academically, my qualifications are terrible. But the joy of the paranormal is it opens up so many wonderful avenues to learn and also opportunities. And I'm just so, so grateful. And you can tell by my Bristolian accent as well that being part of this journey of the Jamaica Inn, you know, it's such a blessing. And even now, tomorrow, when I drive and I go up by the side of the Brown Willie and I look down and see the Jamaica Inn in the distance, my stomach still does a flip with excitement.
I tell you what I think is exciting about it is that we've spoken about these different people for whom have passed through and the connection that they've had as part of that story of the inn all the way back to its very humble beginnings, to how it's grown, who's been through there, the different types of arguments, wandering eyes, fights, people who get drunk and have to go and defend their honor, all of these different characters. And in 100 years' time, in 200 years' time, it's the fact that more than likely your name, your team's name, what you've been doing are going to be part of that story.
Oh, that would be fabulous to be remembered that way. And, you know, without the team, you are nothing. We are a collective, and we are so lucky to have different interests and different perspectives and different approaches, and that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, because you're always trying different things. You don't rest on your laurels. You're really trying to engage with asking those types of questions, and how can you go about finding it out? You know, you're
So
testing different things.
things like Cornish language, dressing up in period costume. Ever since the wonderful Lisa made the Georgian dress by hand from original Patton and my 1840s dress for Mary Downing, it seemed to have changed. So the dressing up, the mannerisms, how people speak, it seems to attract things. And I think as an investigator, personally, that's the way we go. Plus, you know, a small knowledge of history. You don't have to be an academic, but just read and listen and absorb as much as you can of the information.
Well, it's about trying to make some kind of connection, isn't it? In some manner, find some way of reaching out to allow them as much to see that there's that similarity, and to try and communicate back, you know, as opposed to two worlds kind of operating very differently. You're trying to bring the two together in some small capacity. And, you know, it makes much more sense that doing that can then stir up activity.
It's like I say, I never get bored. And, you know, I hope that I'm there for another 8 years, even though I should be very, very old.
No, not at all.
But, you know, again, it's such a pleasure coming on and having someone who's so interested in a subject that I could talk for hours for, you know, and it's pure heaven. I cannot thank you enough.
Oh no, likewise. I love talking to you about the inn. I mean, it's so fascinating, and I hope that people listening really do kind of get a feel for all of its wonders. You know, its history, the people, the sense of time and place, you know, the moments that it's seen, the things that it's seen and been part of. And then also this wonderful thread that runs through it of ghosts and paranormal activity, and you know, all the documentation and reporting that you're gathering. I mean, on so many levels, there's so many interests there. And so I really hope that, you know, for those that are interested, that they maybe come and see what's happening, find out more, maybe experience some of these things for themselves, but also maybe encourage them to try doing something similar. You know, can they do a similar type project with a location that they're just as much passionate about as you are? You know, it's kind of seeing where you can do some of these things for yourself, I think.
It's to me, I'd help anyone out, and you know, any heritage place, and I do that with my other fingers in many pies that I have. But to give something back because of the wonderful opportunities the Jamaica Inn has opened up, I think it's that yin and yang. You know, it's you need to give back what opportunities have been given to you, and also help others.
Absolutely. And you know, I think that's, I mean, I've said it before on the podcast, I think doing that within the paranormal is so important, because you know, we're not doing things in isolation, and we can all learn from each other, and we can all gain some insight from what other people are doing, but also sometimes help to see maybe a different approach. And
exactly. And, I have to give a big shout out to Matt and Chris from Q Studios in Bristol, because Kevin Charity has given us a commission to redo the stable block video that's 10 minutes long. So we're going to update it, but we're also going to actually do a full documentary about the history, the paranormal, and if it all goes to plan, then people might be able to buy copies in the actual gift shop and take home that piece of history. So, fingers crossed, we might be able to get this all out everywhere. And then that will be a platform to build on, same as, with your wonderful podcast that goes all around the world.
And again, I think that's part of the beauty of being able to do something like this. It's sharing stories, it's sharing history, it's sharing something really incredible with other people who maybe don't have it sitting on their doorstep. And if they do have it sitting on their doorstep, maybe making them aware of what they have on their doorstep.
I always say to people, I did a talk at Shepton Mallet Prison a couple of years ago, and I said, the thing about us, we walk down a street, we never look up. If you look up and look at architecture, there is a hidden story to be told of so many buildings with their Georgian facades and the ornaments and the carvings, and suddenly you realise there's a world that you've never noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible, and I completely echo what you just said, and I just hope that people who have listened and who've enjoyed this really take the time to look up and notice the inn if they haven't done so already before.
Yeah, and don't forget there are many haunted rooms if you can't get in 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Absolutely.
And if you're the other thing as well that people don't realise is when we sleep, even in a modern building, you can still have a ghost watching you.
Yeah, they're not picky. They tend to go everywhere, don't they?
Exactly, except for when I get undressed and then they run away.
Oh my goodness. The kind of the images that people have had today with worms,
Yes.
ghosts
Yes.
and naked bodies. We've had a bit of everything.
But that's the fun of finding out these wonderful stories. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Honestly, thank you so much for giving up so much of your time to share such incredible stories and accounts and history. Honestly, I can't thank you enough. It's been so interesting to listen, to talk with you about it, find out things that I didn't know, go in a bit deeper to things that I knew. Honestly, thank you so much on a personal level, but also for everybody that I know is going to be listening.
Oh, thank you. It's always an honor, and you are such a fabulous host.
Oh, thank you. And I'll say goodbye to everybody listening. Bye, everybody. If you've made it to the end of this podcast, a huge thank you for your continued listenership. This was a fantastic episode to celebrate our 100th episode, to be able to revisit a truly phenomenal location with an amazing guest who's been so supportive of the podcast over the years. Karin really is the perfect guest for our 100th episode. And she doesn't disappoint either. As we mentioned in the podcast, the inn is a place that really does just keep giving up more of its secrets. And even just a day after Karin and I got together to record this podcast, she unearthed lots of new information that was squirreled away within the inn itself. She discovered that the moorland where the Jamaica Inn would be built was in fact owned by two people, Thomas Wills and James Scarwin. And on the 12th of August 1776, Thomas Wills signed two leases, one granting his share of the land to Thomas Hawke, most likely a relative by marriage of Captain John Broad. The other share was to Broad himself. And interestingly, Thomas Hawke signed his share straight over to John Broad, making him the sole lease tenant. John Broad was also in talks with James to lease his share of the land. They agreed that this would happen, as long as he would at his own expense hedge in 20 acres of moorland to create several fields, and on land designated by James, would build a large dwelling house with stables and haylofts. A yearly rent of 5 shillings to be paid every quarter was agreed, and the lease for 99 years, or 2.5 lifetimes, was settled. Captain Broad, his son James and John, were those thus named. This was due to the death of his wife Mary Bowers, who died not long after the birth of their second child John, leaving him no option but to leave the sea and settle down to raise his children. It seems he wanted to leave them roots and be settled, so they could build their own lives and always have a roof over their heads. So we now know that the new date is 1776, plus the name was due to the Scarwen family, who traded with Jamaica, plus most likely Captain Broad would have sailed to the island quite a few times, plus it was common for more mariners to name an inn after something connected to their former sea life. It all adds to the rich tapestry of stories that continue to be unearthed, the secrets that the inn continues to share. And who knows, in 6 months, in a year, in 10 years, in another 100 years, what stories will it continue to tell us? Just to give you a little idea of what is ahead over the next few weeks, as part of some upcoming podcasts, you can expect reports and discussions around haunted pubs from Lorian Jones, an interviewing exploring history's first ghosts from Professor Irving Finkel from the British Museum. We take a look at the Willington poltergeist haunting and chat with the owner of the old Vicarage Hotel in Bridgewater about its history and ghosts. This was a location featured on Help My House is Haunted on the Discovery Channel, and I personally think shares some of the best EVPs captured I've ever heard. So make sure to keep listening and following the social media pages for some of those updates. And don't forget that for May, June and July, you can listen to daily bonus paranormal content for as little as £1 a month, hundreds of downloads and more to enjoy and celebrate our 100 episodes created of the podcast that have aired so far, and help towards putting out, hopefully, 100 more. If you can help with this goal, your help would be much appreciated. The links will be in the podcast description notes.